A very good morning to all of you. Respected Dr. Duvvuri Subbarao Garu, Professor C.H. Hanmantrao Garu, Sri Ramakrishna Rao Garu, Professor Sanjay Garu, family members of Sri B.P.R. Vithal Garu, Dr. G.R. Reddy Garu, Dr. Jaiprakash Narayana, our director, Professor Revati, distinguished guests, faculty, research scholars, and staff. I extend a warm welcome to everyone present here to the third BPR Vithal Memorial Lecture to be delivered by Dr. Duvvuri Subbarao Garu, India's Federal Fiscal Federalism course. I now invite Sri Ramakrishna Rao Garu, chairperson of today's lecture, to please come onto the stage. Sri Ramakrishna Rao is from the 1991 of Indian Administrative Service of Telangana cadre. He is presently working as Special Chief Secretary Finance, Government of Telangana. The prudent and sustainable management of the state finances is his responsibility. He has presented all the budgets of the new state made so far and has mobilized resources required for the flagship schemes of the state. He has successfully introduced various financial systems in the state, leading to enhanced financial control and transparency. He also worked as Director General of the Center for Good Governance. In his capacity as DG, he was involved with a number of reform programs, mainly based on IT, in several states of the country. He has held leadership positions in the field of education, healthcare, and was Collector and District Magistrate of Adilabad and Guntur in United Andhra Pradesh. He holds graduate and master's degrees in engineering from Indian Institute of Technology at Kanpur in Delhi, and also an MBA in investments. He is nominee, Government of Telangana, in the Board of Governors of our institute.
Very good morning to all of you. Today's program will start by paying a floral tribute to Sri B.P.R. Vithal Garu.
It's an honor and privilege for me to invite Dr. Duvvuri Subbarao Garu, who will be delivering today's memorial lecture on India's fiscal federalism and Vadis. So please come on. Dr. Duvvuri Subbarao, former Governor of the Reserve Bank of India, 2008 to 2013, is a distinguished economist who led the RBI during a period of global financial turbulence. A 1972 IAS topper, he served as Finance Secretary to the Government of India and Secretary to the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. He also worked as lead economist at the World Bank and alumnus of IIT Kharagpur, IIT Kanpur, and Ohio State University. He was a Humphrey Fellow at MIT and earned his doctorate from Andhra University. His book, Who Moved My Interest Rate, explains policy dilemmas and challenges facing an emergency economy in a globalized world. Dr. Subbarao is currently guest faculty at Yale University. I now call upon Professor E. Revati, Director CESS, to please come onto the stage. Rita PLNG is a development economist. She attained her MPhil and PhD degrees from Kakatiya University, Warangal. She was an ICSR doctoral fellow in women's studies during 1988-91 and worked on women work in technology and agriculture for a PhD. She was also senior fellow ICSR during 2010 to 12, for which she worked on land access to women and women empowerment. She was an active member of Telangana Intellectual Forum, which contributed to the cause of the Telangana state. I now request Ramakrishna Rao Garu to please conduct today's proceedings. Thank you.
Very good morning to all the participants on this Sri B.P.R. Vithal's Memorial Lecture, the third lecture today. The topic on which Dr. Subbarao sir is going to talk is about fiscal federalism, Vadis. Just while preparing for this, while preparing for listening to this lecture, I just wanted to look up what does Vadis mean, because the only Vadis that we know of are the Bata slippers, So why this Bata slippers thing is doing about fiscal federalism? Then, as usual, I looked up DeepSeek. So when I looked it up in the DeepSeek, it said that it's a biblical quote where Jesus was asked when he was going to Rome by Peter, the Domine quo vadis. And Jesus replied that I'm going to Rome to be crucified. So hopefully none of us who are on the dais would be crucified for asking this particular question, that where is fiscal federalism in India going today? Today's memorial lecture, I wanted to start with a small snippet which was sent by one of our distinguished senior colleagues, the former Chief Secretary, Sri Mohan Kanda sir, and he wanted me to read it out, for the benefit of everyone. So I just quote from his, snippet. Sri B.P.R. Vithal had a devastating sense of humor. In 1981, I was working as the Managing Director of Andhra Pradesh State Fisheries Development Corporation. I met Sri Vithal, who was then Principal Secretary to Government in the Finance and Planning Department. I submitted to him a proposal requesting for assistance from the state government. He gave me a patient hearing for over half an hour, which was very generous gesture indeed of him from an extraordinarily busy person, and he finally approved a proposal. Overwhelmed with joy and gratitude, but wanting to reinforce the sincerity of my commitment, I told him, as I was leaving, that the money would be spent wisely and well. Vithal called me back from the door and said, with a glint in his eyes, "Take the money, Mohan, and go. Please don't make absurd promises." It was during the same time that the then Chief Secretary sent a note to Vithal suggesting the name of a particular officer for being posted in the Finance Department. Not particularly impressed with the credentials of the officer in question, Vithal wrote back to the Chief Secretary saying, "I concede we practice idiocy in the department. It is, however, of the cultivated variety, not the congenital variety." Years later, I was posted as planning secretary, and Vithal sir by then had become the deputy chairman of the state planning board. I'm not quite sure what he thought about my entry into the hallowed precincts of the finance and planning departments, but he did stipulate one condition: for ensuring that we both should have a harmonious working relationship, that I should tell him a joke every day morning. So this, of course, speaks about the wit and wisdom of Sri B.P.R. Vithal sir. And CESS, of course, as all of us know, it was his brainchild. And today, it's a great honor and privilege for all of us, sitting here to sit in the very institution and then listen to the oration, listen to the lecture of Dr. Subbarao sir about fiscal federalism. So before sir starts, I thought, as the longest serving finance secretary of the state, having this dubious distinction, I thought, I should speak about some of the issues briefly, because I'm sure, sir is going to address several more. Because recently we had the 16th Finance Commission visiting the state of Telangana. And as you might have read in the newspapers, that in general, many of the southern states are now representing that they're getting a raw deal by the Finance Commission. which gives the formula for both vertical and horizontal distribution of the devolution of the divisible pool, which is collected by the government of India. So increasingly, it is felt by many states, especially by the states in the South India, that the contribution which is being made by these states to the central kitty is much, much more than what they are getting back. And over a period of time, there's a divergence between what they used to get in the previous finance commission and then what they're getting now. So over a period of time, the monies which they're getting as a proportion are coming down for the formula which is being adopted and recommended by the finance commission. So, sir, obviously this is a major issue because as you see, we are sitting in Telangana, where when the state was formed in 2014, we had a per capita income of 1.24 lakh crores, sorry, 1.24 lakh. And then today, in 2024, 23-24, we have per capita income of 3.56 lakh rupees. That is, it has increased by 3 times in 10 years. And from a position of number 11 in the country, Telangana today, we are number 3 in the country. Now, with such a fast growth which is happening, this has kind of, adversely impacted the devolution which comes back to the state, because per capita income distance is a major criteria. The equity is taken as a major criteria while devolving the funds. So therefore, how do we ensure that the states which are performing well are not disadvantaged in terms of the resources which they are able to get from the center is a major issue, sir. Of course, Finance Commission looks into that, but it's a very, very important and cornerstone of the fiscal federalism. Now, the second issue, sir, is about GST, because from 2017 July onwards, both the center and states have come together, and we have some kind of a pooled sovereign, where the GST Council has taken over the responsibility of deciding the rates and all these things. So therefore, the levels which are available for the states, the resources which are when we pulled up at the state level, have now reduced dramatically. And the compensation regime, which was there for the first 5 years, has now come to an end. And therefore, several states are now facing this problem of, GST, in the sense that the first 5 years for the transition period, there was a set compensation which was given. But once that came to a close, that also happened to be the period of Corona. Therefore, several states having a serious resource constraint issues. And the central sector schemes, much has been written, much has been said. The one size fits all kind of an approach, lack of flexibility, and even the avowed objectives of giving money to those states where there is most requirement is also not being met. Ultimately, the states who are able to master the bureaucratic process, submit the UCs in time, all these things, they are able to garner more resources. So therefore, central sector schemes also, which again transfer large amount of resources to the states, apart from the Finance Commission allocation, probably they also require re-architecting, restructuring and things like that. And sir, in several parts of the country, as you are aware, the local governments play a very critical role, and all of us love decentralization only up to ourselves. States want only decentralization up to themselves. They don't want to pass it on anything further. But at the same time, as the economy grows, as we become, whatever, $4 trillion to $30 trillion, $40 trillion by 2047, increasingly greater and greater responsibilities will be discharged by the local bodies. So how do we provide resources for them is going to be another major issue also. So I'm sure, sir, you'll be touching upon various aspects with your, wide spectrum understanding of the issues at the state level, country level, and international level. And I'm sure we'll all be delighted to hear, sir, about fiscal federalism, Vadis. Thank you very much. I'll request Dr. Revati, Director CESS, to kindly say a few words about Dr. B.P.R. Vithal Garu.
Good morning to all. I welcome Dr. Y.B. Reddy Garu, who has joined just now. On behalf of our chairman, Professor Najni, and Center for Economic and Social Studies, I welcome you all to this third annual BPR Vithal Memorial Lecture. It's appropriate for us to remember Sri B.P.R. Vithal's contribution to setting up of this institute. Sri B.P.R. Vithal, founder, Center for Economic and Social Studies, Hyderabad, was the son of Professor B.V. Ramanarsu, Principal, Warangal Arts and Science College, and Professor of Economics. Born in Rajahmundry on 30th November 1927, Vithal was educated at Madrasa-e-Aliyah High School in Hyderabad. In 1942, he quit his undergraduate studies at Nizam College, attended the Quit India session of the Indian National Congress in Mumbai, and immersed himself in the national movement. On Gandhiji's advice, he returned to his studies. He has preserved the note that has been written by Gandhiji, and which is also reproduced in our memoirs on Sri Vithal that we have published after his demise. He was the first Indian president of Madras Christian College Students' Union to fly the Indian tricolor flag. He graduated from Madras Christian College with BSc in chemistry, and he joined the Hyderabad Public Service Commission in 1949 and qualified for the IAS in 1950. In one of his earlier postings as principal, Community Development College at Rajendra Nagar, P.V. Narasimha was his student. Later, he served as Deputy Collector at Banswada, Nizamabad District, Collector of Medak and Karimnagar districts. In 1960, Sri Vithal was appointed as Registrar of Osmania University. During his period, he built the Department of Economics at Arts College by inviting stalwarts like Professor Gautam Mathur, Professor Raja Jachalaya, and Professor N.S. Iyengar. B.P.R. Vithal served the Planning and Finance Departments, Government of Andhra Pradesh, for a continuous period of 13 years during 1969 to 1982, as both as Secretary and Principal Secretary. He was Deputy Chairman, AP State Planning Board, and Member 10th Finance Commission. He was also Chairman, Expenditure Commission, Government of Kerala. He had a brief stint at the International Monetary Fund as Fiscal Advisor to the governments of Sudan and Malawi. He was a member of the Ken Raj Committee on Taxation of Agriculture Income, Government of India. Vithal Garu founded the Center for Economic and Social Studies. It's for the benefit of the younger generation and especially our PhD students who are here to know the underlying thinking with which the institute they are into has been founded. Social science research at that time was concentrated in Delhi and revolved mostly around macroeconomic issues. It was felt that research around social sciences need to be decentralized and closer to the ground realities. Research institutes were set up in other states like southern Indian states like Tamil Nadu, where Malcolm Adisashia has set up the MIDS, and Kerala Ken Raj has set up the Center for Development Studies, Trivandrum, and Karnataka B.K.R. Rao has set up ISEC. And by then, the planning department also in the state was involved in preparation of development plans on a regional basis, as by then Telangana issue acquired importance after 1969. VLS Prakash Rao, Manzoor Alam, and Afzal Muhammad and Dr. Y. Venugopal Reddy Garu were working on regional planning, and Dr. Y. V. Reddy Garu has prepared development plan for Rayalaseema. So, but instituting a full-time state planning board, according to Sri Vithal's thinking, was not appropriate because he thought that would be under the control of the government and it would not be autonomous. Vithal sir was keen that the institution should be an autonomous institution, fully funded by the government, working for the state government as a think tank, contributing to policy making of the state, similar to that of the Planning Commission working for Government of India. He has taken the initiative to set up the CESS along with other founder members, Dr. G. Ramareddy, Vice Chancellor, Osmania University, Dr. S.K. Rao, DG, Director General, NARD, Professor C.H. Hanumantarao, at that time he was a director of IEG, and Dr. Wahiduddin Khan, who became the first director of the center later in 1982. The center was formally established on 26 February 1980. He was the first chairman of the center. Thus, he positioned CESS as an autonomous institution, which was later brought into the national network of ICSR institutions and providing a platform between academicians and policymakers. He built the institution brick by choosing suitable and eminent persons. He was instrumental in getting land allotted for the center in its present site. The necessary permissions and funds were easy to flow with him at the helm of the affairs. B.P.R. Vithal has many publications to his credit. Prominent among them are A State in Periodic Crisis, Andhra Pradesh, 2012. In retrospect, a miscellany in 2012, Gargill Formula for Allocation of Central Assistance for State Plans in 2002, Fiscal Federalism in India 2001. His research paper titled The Telangana Surpluses, a Case Study, played an influential role in shaping the demand for a separate state in Telangana. Vithal sir was always interacting with faculty on the areas of their work. He used to send brief notes reflecting his own experience and thoughts, which was helpful to know the historical context of the issue. He was known for his wit, and his presence in meetings would make it much livelier and more interesting. CESS fraternity remembers Sri B.P.R. Vithal Garu, the Pitamaha of CESS, in reverence for his contribution in setting up this institute and making it known nationally and internationally. In memory of Sri B.P.R. Vithal, the annual lectures were instituted from 2021. The first memorial lecture was given by Dr. Rangarajan on India's recent growth experience. And the second lecture was delivered by Dr. Vijay Kelkar in 2023 on towards strengthening India's cooperative federalism, initiatives for multi-level governance reforms in December. The third lecture will be delivered by Dr. Subbarao Garu, again former Governor RBI and a scholar in public finance on India's fiscal federalism for Vadis. It is most appropriate that Subbarao Garu is chairing this session. Thank you. I invite Subbarao Garu to deliver the lecture. Thank you.
Well, they're fixing the software. We'll start anyway. Thank you very much. I've often been asked, who is your best teacher? When I look back on my life and career, I find that some of my best teachers have not been those who taught me in a classroom, but from those whom I learned even without their knowing it. If I were to draw up a list of such people, such teachers, from whom I learned without their knowing it, gurus to whom I owe Guru Dakshin in an Eklavya sense, Sri B.P.R. Vithal will top the list. Therefore, my privilege to deliver this lecture today to honor the memory of one of my most valued teachers. When I wrote an obituary for Sri Vithal when he passed away in 2020, I described him as an intellectual bureaucrat. An intellectual bureaucrat. Most people would scoff at the idea, it's an oxymoron. How can an intellectual be a bureaucrat, and why would a bureaucrat be intellectual? Sri Vithal defied the stereotype. He was a true blue Renaissance man whose scholarship straddled several disciplines: public administration, economics, political science, philosophy, physics, history, literature, theology. And he had the wisdom to imbibe all that scholarship into a worldview that was at once humane and pragmatic. Sri B.P.R. Vithal, as we just learned, had a long and distinguished career as the Finance Secretary of the combined state of Andhra Pradesh. In some sense, he defined the job of the Finance Secretary, and in return, the job of the Finance Secretary defined him. Having been Finance Secretary myself over an extended period, although not as extended as that of Dr. Vithal, I know that one of the occupational hazards of being a Finance Secretary is to say no. Because secretaries, colleagues, sometimes even ministers approach the Finance Secretary for funding. As much as the Finance Secretary wants to be positive, it's not possible for him or her to say yes all the time, because they also have the responsibility of balancing the books of the government. But how you say no makes a difference. And this is where Sri Vithal made a difference. Whenever people came to him, officials or ministers, he heard with an open mind, made suggestions where he could, considered each proposal on merits, and balancing with the funds available, approved the schemes. But when he had to say no, he said it in such an agreeable way that even when people left his office, they were probably disappointed, but never disgruntled. And he was such a colossus that even finance secretaries, father states, used to look up to him for guidance and advice. Sri B.P.R. Vithal was member of the 10th Finance Commission, 93-98. As we learn later in this lecture, the Finance Commission's job is very unenviable, as Dr. Vavi Reddy also knows. They have to balance the vociferous demands of the states with the need for money of the center. And that's a very difficult job. And when Sri Vithal became member of the Finance Commission after he retired, that was at a time when wind was blowing towards states. We had stalwart chief ministers like NTR, Jayalalitha, Hegde, who built their political platforms on an anti-center stance. So wind was decisively flowing towards the states. And Sri Vithal, of course, steeped in state finances much of his career, I was secretly, selfishly happy. I was finance secretary of Andhra Pradesh at that time. I said, okay, this is an opportune moment. Here's a man who knows state finances, who is probably biased towards states. Wind is blowing towards states, we'll get more money. I was proved completely wrong. Sri Vithal, of course, knew state finances, but he also had the nationalistic view to balance the demands of the states with the needs of the center. When you have to give a memorial lecture like this, it is difficult to identify a topic, because you've got to identify a topic that matches with the domain knowledge, expertise of the lecturer and the legacy of the departed person. In this case, though, I didn't have a problem because much of fiscal federalism I learned from Sri Vithal, so it is only appropriate that I address a topic in fiscal federalism. So after some thought, I decided on this India's fiscal federalism co Vadis. Deciding the topic was easy, but when I thought about it, when I tried to collect my thoughts, organize my ideas, build a storyline, I felt challenged. Why? Because it's over 15 years since I left the government, over 10 years since I left the Reserve Bank of India. In these years, the world has moved on, India has moved on, states have moved on, federalism has moved on, fiscal federalism has moved on, whereas I remain frozen. So what do I say? What do I say that adds value? So these days, whenever I have to address a substantive topic, my escape mechanism is to tell stories. So I'll tell you a story. Throw your mind back 30 years ago to the mid-1990s, when Deva Gowda had become Prime Minister. Those of you who have a recall of the period will remember that Deva Gowda had become Prime Minister with the support of Chief Ministers. So Chief Ministers, after having anointed him, demanded a pound of flesh, give us more money. But Deva Gowda had no money to give. So he did what a seasoned politician would do, he appointed a committee. Under the chairmanship of then Home Minister Indrajit Gupta, there were 3 other cabinet ministers on that committee, including Finance Minister Chidambaram. Pranab Mukherjee, Deputy Chairman Planning Commission, was on the committee, and there were 8 chief ministers. The remit of this committee was to determine the minimum share of its tax pool that the center would give to states. Will it be 35%, 37%, 48%, 52%, whatever, through all the routes? One chief minister said, why does the central government need money at all? Like NTR, the center is a conceptual myth. They don't need any money at all. Give us 50%. Another chief minister said, center is wasting money. Give us 60%. Another chief minister said, we know how to spend money better. Give us 70%. The higher a chief minister pitched, the more heroic he became. Meanwhile, this committee, like any government committee, evolved into subcommittees and sub-subcommittees, and went on for about 8 months, several meetings. By the end of the 8 months, the divergence between states and center was much wider than when we started. We were nowhere close to a consensus. I remember the last meeting of this committee in Vigyan Bhavan on a Saturday afternoon in Delhi. There were 4 cabinet ministers, 8 chief ministers, their support staff. About 200 of us were packed into that room. And the meeting, as expected, went all over the map. Chief ministers very stridently, very acrimoniously demanding that more money must be given, and central ministers arguing with them that we cannot give more money. And this went on for about probably 3.5 hours. At the end of all that, Chairman Indrajit Gupta was so exasperated that he said, I want to make a plea to chief ministers. He said, look, we understand that you need money, but please understand that the center also needs money. And India is one country. Please take a larger view. Indrajit Gupta must have made that so sincerely that the sense of realism prevailed. So in the next 15 minutes, a consensus evolved that the center will give 50% of its tax share to states. Everybody agreed, central ministers, chief ministers, except one person, our chief minister, Chandrababu Naidu. He held out, he looked at the ceiling, he looked at the floor, he looked at his watch, he looked at the window, wouldn't budge. 200 pairs of eyes were boring into him, agree, so that we can have a deal. He looked at the ceiling, he looked at his watch, he looked at me, and then questioning. So I said quietly, I said, sir, we had our say, 50% is much more than we expected. Everybody has agreed, I think you should fall in line. He nodded, looked at the ceiling, looked at the floor, looked out the window. And then I was very worried that people will think I'm the villain of the piece because our conversation was in Telugu, it was brief, but everybody probably would have guessed that I was advising him against agreeing. At this point, I want to give you a configuration of the geography of the conference room. There's one central table like that where the central minister sat, and there was a horseshoe table around it where the chief minister sat. Andhra Pradesh, alphabetically first, was at one end of the table. West Bengal, alphabetically last, only alphabetically last, was at the other end of the table. There was tension in the room, pin drop silence. In that tension and silence, Jyoti Basu, Chief Minister of West Bengal, got up. Everybody thought he's taking a bathroom break. But instead of heading for the exit, he started walking around the table, tripping over 200 toes. And it took him about a minute and a half to travel from Andhra Pradesh to West Bengal. I was sitting next to our Chief Minister. I got up to offer my seat to him. He pushed me down with one arm. He put his other arm over Chandrababu Naidu and said, Babu, I think, this is a time when we must take a nationalistic outlook. We had our say we need money, but the center also needs money. We must subordinate our narrow interest to the larger interest. That conversation was person to person, but because there was so much silence, everybody heard it. Jyoti Basu didn't even wait for Chandrababu Naidu to respond. He started walking back towards West Bengal. But even before he reached Odisha, our man looked at the ceiling for the last time, 10 seconds, and he nodded. And there was a glee, jubilation in the room that we had a deal. So we adjourned for tea. Those of you who have the pleasure of enjoying Vijnan Bhavan tea would know that known for its high quality cuisine. So we had a grand tea. But nothing came of this grand bargain because the Devagowda government collapsed 2 weeks after that. And I don't think even the minutes of the meeting were written. The reason I'm telling you that story is that it illustrates a time when leaders, both at the state and in the center, took a larger view, took a nationalistic view, subordinated their narrow political interest to the larger view. Fast forward to recent times. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I think, the central government slashed excise duties on petrol and diesel, and quite understandably, they went to rooftop shouting that we've done this for the common man. That's understandable. And states governed by BJP had also reduced state VAT, synchronizing with the center's concession. At a meeting of chief ministers, the prime minister is reported to have, I'm saying reported because I don't know, it's only reported to have chided non-BJP chief ministers for not doing their bit for reducing the burden on the common man. And the non-BJP chief ministers hit back at the PM, saying that don't evangelize to us. Petrol and diesel prices are high because your SESS and CESS are high. So cut that first before you talk to us. That is an example, an illustration of contentious federalism. So we moved from cooperative federalism to contentious federalism. In fact, if you look back over 75 years, this I learned from Dr. Y.V. Reddy to some extent. If you look back over 75 years, our federalism can be broken into three phases. The first phase, from the time of independence up until the early 1970s, for 25 years, was what I call docile federalism. The center had complete command over the political and economic space. Both the center and states were ruled by one party, the Congress Party. Pandit Nehru, who was the prime minister, was seen not so much as a political leader, not so much as a party leader, but as a national leader. And both Prime Minister Nehru and Home Minister Patel used to write letters to chief ministers on issues of national interest, not necessarily connected with the states. And in the economic dimension, the state center had complete command because much of the investment was through public sector enterprises, and the center decided where that would be invested. There was not much private investment, but even to the extent private investment was there, the center decided through the license permit laws where they would invest, how much they would invest, and for what purpose. And much of the center-state resources transfer happened via the Planning Commission, where again the center decided how much money each state would get and how they would spend it. The net result was that states acquiesced in the center's dominance, and we had docile federalism. The second phase, running from the early 1970s to the mid-1990s, is what I would call cooperative federalism. This was a time, some of you will recall, when regional parties have started coming into being, and there's actually one office in several states. The center was also frequently resorting to Article 356, that created some friction. So the political space got a bit contentious. But the economic space remained cooperative. There was broadly shared understanding that we must all be subscribed to socialist philosophy. There was widely shared understanding that backward states, underdeveloped regions need more money. So in the economic dimension, there was cooperative federalism. On balance, I would say that that period is characterized by cooperation between the center and states. The third phase, running from the mid-1990s to the current time, is what I would call contentious or combative federalism. This was the time when the reforms, the Blitzkrieg reforms of 91 had started taking root. The 73rd and 74th amendments to the Constitution were effected, giving decentralization a constitutional status. On the political dimension, regional parties acquired power not just at the states, but they also started having influence at the center. We remember that the Deva Gowda and Gujarat governments had support of regional parties, and subsequent UPA and NDA governments, including the present NDA government, have regional parties as coalition partners. Some of them depended, as indeed the NDA 3 does today, on the support of regional parties for their parliament majority. That growing power, a growing ascendancy of states also reflected in the economic dimension. Because of the reforms, the center's influence diminished, if not disappeared, because there was no more public sector investment. Private investment, the center could not decide. It's completely delicensed, so private investors decide where to go. Planning Commission has been abolished. Much of central state transfers take place via the Finance Commission, which is apolitical, which is formula driven. So center's influence declined, states went up. So that's the transition from docile to cooperative to confrontational federalism. One broad narrative that emerged out of this current phase of federalism is that the terms of fiscal federalism are loaded against states. If you want to amplify that in a stylistic sense, this is what states contain. That our expenditure responsibilities are much larger than the resources we have. The center does not give us enough money to bridge that gap. Moreover, we do not have autonomy on how to spend the money that the center gives us. The center even controls how much we borrow from whom and for what purpose. This is broadly the contention of the state. Some of you, I used to have that paper. Chief Minister Stalin, Tamil Nadu, actually wrote an op-ed in the Hindu exactly on this line sometime in December. And several other chief ministers have made these points either in speeches, etc. But this is the gist of what states argue. I believe that this contention is debatable. But in order to put that debate in perspective, it's important for all of us to have a shared understanding of the combined fiscal space of the center and state. So I intend spending about 5 minutes explaining that. We know that the Constitution demarcates the responsibilities of the center and states. Where should the center spend? Where should the state spend? Where can the center tax? Where can the states tax? This is very clearly demarcated. This is not done randomly. This is not done arbitrarily. This is not done on a whim. A lot of thought had gone into it. In fact, the constitutional division of responsibilities between the center and states is consistent with what is called the subsidiarity principle. The subsidiarity principle. The subsidiarity principle is a textbook thing which says that more buoyant taxes in any federation, more buoyant taxes must be given to the higher levels of government, less buoyant taxes must be given to the lower levels of government. I do not want to go into an explanation of the subsidiarity principle, but I just want to tell you that the theory has been validated by experience around the world, including our own country. So the constitutional division of responsibilities between the center and states is consistent with the subsidiarity principle. Accordingly, the center has more buoyant taxes like customs, central excise, personal income tax, corporate tax, and states have less buoyant taxes like tax on land, tax on agriculture, tax on sales, tax on property. This is consistent with subsidiarity principle. When it comes to expenditure too, the subsidiarity principle says that those expenditure responsibilities which impact people's everyday lives must be decentralized. In fact, every expenditure responsibility must be decentralized to the lowest level possible. Accordingly, states today have responsibility for what matters to people's lives: education, health, rural infrastructure, law and order. And center has responsibility for national defense, security, international trade, etc. So it is consistent with that. When the constitution makers made this division between the center and states, they realized that there is a gap between what the states have to spend on and what the resources they can generate on their own. So there's a gap, structural gap between the expenditure responsibilities and the own resources of the states. So the Constitution lays down the appointment of a finance commission every 5 years. Dr. Y.V. Reddy was the chairman of the 14th Finance Commission. Sri Vithal served on the 10th Finance Commission. A finance commission to be appointed every 5 years to decide on how much the center would give states. Actually, there's two main responsibilities. The Finance Commission decides what share of the central taxes should be devolved to states and how that share must be distributed across states. So the vertical sharing and horizontal sharing. Those are the main responsibilities of the Finance Commission. The Constitution also allows the Finance Commission to make some special grants in addition to tax devolutions. That is the only constitutionally prescribed mechanism for transfer of resources from the center to state. the only constitutionally prescribed mechanism. But over the years, over the last 75 years, several other mechanisms of transfer of resources from the center to states have come into vogue. There is a Finance Commission, and after the 73rd and 74th Amendments, starting, I think, 2000, the center has also been giving money to be given to local bodies. I'll talk a little more about it, but in addition to giving money directly to states, it is also giving money to states to be passed on to local bodies, both urban and rural local bodies. This was afterwards. There was the erstwhile Planning Commission. The Planning Commission used to give loans and grants to states. Then there's centrally sponsored schemes. Centrally sponsored schemes are a mechanism for the center to encourage states to spend on what they think are national priorities. For example, malaria eradication, or midday meal, or employment guarantee. So the center would give money to states, and states would spend it either by matching their own funds or entirely central funds. So centrally sponsored schemes. So several mechanisms have evolved for transfer of money from the center to states. And then I've drawn a line, and I said hidden transfers. The reason is that some transfers from center to state takes place, and they're hidden from us. If you know, all these analysts who pour over numbers would not see them. Probably it's not possible to see them as well. For example, if in one state A, the central government says we're going to lay 100 kilometers of railway line, that is central transfer of resources to that state. But we don't count that as part of central transfer of resources. Another thing, more hidden, is the MSP, minimum support price. Who gets the MSP? Who gets the benefit of MSP? Farmers with a marketable surplus. So states who have farmers with marketable surplus get central transfers via the MSP. And states which do not have a market surplus get discriminated against. In fact, when I was finance secretary here, Jayaprakash Garu probably remembers, we did a study that, if you take the prescription of the MSP over time, the MSP for wheat had gone up proportionally higher than MSP for rice, which means that states which had a marketable surplus of wheat gained more vis-a-vis states which had a marketable surplus of rice, which we were in the combined state of Andhra Pradesh. That was one of our grievances which we used to represent to the center. Then, of course, there are even more hidden transfers. If some large firm like General Motors or Foxconn comes and says, we're going to invest $100 billion, center can say not state A, state B, not state X, state Y. That happens all the time. We hear about it in the papers. To what extent it's happening, I don't know, but we see that it is happening to some extent. And then there's external funding. External funding by World Bank, ADB, bilateral donors. The central government controls that. So central government can nudge those agencies to finance certain states vis-a-vis some other states. So those are some hidden transfers that take place, and they're quite significant. But when we talk about center-state transfers, we talk above the line, and I'm going to confine the rest of my lecture to those items above the line. So when you do this transfers above the line from the center to states, one big picture that emerges is the 60-40 picture. The 60-40 picture, which is that if you take the combined taxation of the center and states together, if say the center and states are together collecting 100, the center collects 60%, states collect 40%. If you take the expenditure, combined expenditure of the center and states, it is the mirror image of that. States spend 60% of the combined expenditure, center spends 40%. So the story is the center collects 60% of the total tax, gets to spend only 40%. States collect 40% of the total tax, but they spend as much as 60%. So this is that picture, 60-40 expenditure and taxation. When you take all this into account, the 60-40 picture, and now evaluate the contention of the states, the terms of fiscal federalism are loaded against them, which is what I want to do. It's possible to argue on the contrary, and indeed I will, that Indian states enjoy more spending power and hence more political clout than their counterparts in other countries. And second, over time, the terms of a fiscal federalism have moved in favor of states. In order to move this debate forward, I'm going to talk about 7 issues. And in the process, with due respect to Ramakrishna Rao Garu, I will contest some of what he said. But I believe that makes for a good debate. He's special chief secretary of a state, so he has to say that, and I think he believes that, but that's okay. So, take the center state expenditure shares. As I said, states spend as much as 60%. That share is much larger than what states in other countries enjoy, which is, for example, Brazil is 40, Indonesia 38, Australia 40, USA 40. India actually is more than that. Over the last 5 years, Indian states have been spending 63.9% of the total expenditure. What does it mean? More spending, more political power. We know that, right? Government spend, they get more political power, more clout. Second, if you tax, you lose votes. If you spend, you earn votes. So states are having the pleasure of spending without the pain of taxation, right? Relatively speaking. So center is taxing, states are spending. That's the first point, which is that states in India enjoy much greater political clout because of their spending power than in most other large federations. Second, tax devolution. When the Constitution was enacted 75 years ago, the Constitution gave states a share in just 2 taxes: the personal income tax and central excise. States had a share only in 2 taxes. States agitated over time, saying that this is not fair, that we're getting, within the buoyant taxes of the center, we're getting a share in the less buoyant taxes. So the Constitution was amended in the year 2000 to give states a share in the total tax pool of the center. And I want to acknowledge that the brain behind this was Sri B.P.R. Vithal. Remember the year 2000, and Sri Vithal was the member of the Finance Commission 93-98. And I used to meet him frequently at that time. He wrote that paper, gave it to me for vetting, interacted with a lot of other people, but since I was in finance, he gave it to me. I had the privilege of vetting that paper, and he was the brain behind this. That states get a share, not just in 1-2 taxes, but the entire tax pool of the center. And the third point is, states have much greater autonomy on spending today than they did before. Because, as I said, the Planning Commission is abolished. You all remember that plans were a big deal. We used to go, in fact, there's some media reporters here used to write that Airbus loads of officers and ministers went for plan discussions to Delhi. We used to go to the Planning Commission, big photo opportunity discussion, and the central government would lord over the states, how much they would give us, how much loan, how much grant, what we should spend it on. So we were restrained, states were constrained to some extent in how much they spent, what they spent. That's gone. Now, much of these transfers take place via the Finance Commission, states enjoying the privilege of deciding how to spend that. And the brain and the motive force behind that is Dr. Y.V. Reddy. So I want to acknowledge that. The chairman of the 14th Finance Commission, they recommended that raise the share of the states before the planning commission was abolished. And now states have a much larger autonomy. So if you take all these three things together, what is the inference we draw? The inference we draw is that states get a larger share of a larger pool and have much larger autonomy on spending. Funding for local bodies. When the Constitution was amended in 1993, giving constitutional status to local bodies, 73rd and 74th Amendments, the understanding was that states would support their local bodies by transferring money to them. But as Ramakrishna Garu pointed out, there's a decentralization theorem. My version of the decentralization theorem is this, that every political functionary wants decentralization to his or her level and no below. So the Prime Minister says, why should we give money to chief ministers? They waste it. So he doesn't want to give money. Chief ministers say, why should we give money to Jilla Parishad chairman? They'll waste it. They won't give money. Jilla Parishad chairman say, we won't give money to Mandal president. They'll waste it. Mandal presidents in turn say, why should we give money to Panchayat presidents? They'll waste it. So every political functionary wants decentralization to his or her level and no further below. Centre saw this. So they decided there was no constitutional mandate or any requirement that they fund, but they started giving money to states to be transferred onwards to local bodies, both urban and rural local bodies. And here's the important thing. The share of transfers to local bodies out of the total tax pool has been increasing over the years. Then let's move on to centrally sponsored schemes. As I said earlier, centrally sponsored schemes are a mechanism for the center to signal national priorities, encourage spending on what they believe are good expenditures. States have had grievance against it. I had a grievance too. I expressed it when I was finance secretary. I'm sure Ramakrishna Rao is doing it today. Their grievances are threefold. First, they say that these are money you're giving for education, health, and stuff like that. Those are state subjects. How do you wading into state subjects? You should not do that. You should give the money to us. And they say, give the money to us unconditionally. Don't say this is for training rural women, this is for training teachers, etc. Just give the money to us. We will decide the priorities. And they say the CESS design is too straitjacketed. What is good for Manipur may not be good for Kerala, but you have the same uniform pattern of schemes all over. Some of these grievances are reasonable. But it's like if you're putting your daughter through college, you agree to give her tuition, pay her tuition, and pay for her living. Then you say, okay, you are in college, you're going to take on a career. Communication skills are very important. So if you take a training course in communication skills, here's some more additional money. Go and take a course in communication. The daughter turns back and says, thank you for the extra money, but I'm not interested in communication. I'm interested in taking tennis coaching. Okay? So, and you say, no, if you want to take tennis coaching, save your money, but this is only for communication. Of course, if you give the money to her unconditionally, she will take neither communication nor tennis. So, but that is the tussle between the center and states on centrally sponsored schemes. Center's argument is this. The argument that this is violative of the Constitution is not true. There is Article 282 in the Constitution which empowers any government to spend on any public purpose. So this is additional big spending. So this is not constitutionally violated. And this has been going on, but I want to say that the state's contention that centrally sponsored schemes are violative of the Constitution is not valid. Take the GST. GST has had about 9 years of history now. The complaint of states is that we have surrendered our sovereignty, that we cannot decide anymore what the tax rates are. But so has the center. The central government has also surrendered its sovereignty. Tax rates, GST rates are decided by the GST Council, which comprises finance minister, union finance minister, and state finance ministers. So as much as the states have conceded the sovereignty, the center too has conceded sovereignty. But ultimately, GST is a win-win option. And it's already showing promise. I sent the text of my speech to some RBI colleagues, and they've written back to me, they've given me some data to say that the tax buoyancy, the state GST tax buoyancy has gone up significantly over the last 9 years from 0.86 to 1.44. States are benefiting. Especially states with a low tax GSTP ratio have benefited even more. So GST has been a win-win, not for the center and states, and much more of a win-win for states which were fiscally handicapped earlier. And it takes time. So I believe that it's unfair for states to agitate as if the GST is a central project thrust on them. The last one is limits on borrowing. This is what rankles most state governments, because most state governments now want to borrow as much as possible. Under Article 293 of the Constitution, states are required to take the permission of the center for any borrowing debt. I mean, there's a proviso that as long as they're indebted to the center, every state will remain indebted to the center for the next 50 years, so that proviso is unnecessary. But states have to take the permission of the center for borrowing. And the Constitution also says that the center can impose conditions while giving permission for borrowing. In fact, some of you might remember that government of Kerala has agitated this issue before the Supreme Court. It is now pending before the Supreme Court. Government of Kerala has argued that this is unfair, this constitutional provision. This constitutional provision of Article 293 is not the machination of any prime minister, not Nehru, not Indira Gandhi, not Vajpayee, not Manmohan Singh, not Narendra Modi. It has been written into the Constitution that states have to take the permission of the center. If you look at other countries, in many other federations, states are not allowed to borrow, period. They're not allowed to borrow. In America, states have to balance their budgets. They can only borrow in the market for specific projects. States in India enjoy the power of borrowing. The other thing is, states are able to borrow at a rate lower than what they would command in the market because of the center's guarantee, not guarantee, but center's permission. Markets assume that there is a guarantee for states borrowing. There is no such guarantee in writing, but markets assume that. The reason is because the Reserve Bank acts as a debt manager, repays the loans at source, so markets have confidence that states will repay. So states are able to borrow at rates lower than what they would command in the market because of this constitutional provision, which they don't realize. The third thing is, as much as the center had the authority and power to impose conditions on any state while giving borrowing, while giving permission, over the last 75, 80 years, they've never invoked that provision. And the most important thing to remember when you talk about borrowing is that India is one fiscal entity. Fiscal profligacy in any state is fiscal profligacy everywhere. So every state has to be well behaved for the country to be well behaved. It's like a village. You know, if there's a contagious disease, the village collectively is healthy only if everyone is healthy. Even if one person is infected, the entire village gets affected. With fiscal federalism, fiscal stability of the country is the same thing. Every state has to be fiscally responsible. in order for the country to be collectively fiscally responsible. I know what you're all thinking now. You're all thinking that this guy is biased completely against the states. He's arguing for them. So to just establish my credentials, I want to spend about 5 minutes admonishing the center. The center, one of the most egregious things that the central government does is impose cess and surcharge. Many of you might be income taxpayers. You know that in addition to income tax, you pay a surcharge on income tax. What is the incentive for the center to do that? The incentive is that if it's tax, they have to share with the states. If it's surcharge, they don't have to share with the states. Just to give you a simple example, if the central government collects 100 rupees and the finance commission says give away 40 rupees, so out of 100, they get to keep 60, give away 40. On the other hand, if they divided that 100 into 80 tax and 20 surcharge, they get to keep the entire 20 and 60% of the 80, which is 48. So they get 20 plus 48, 68, and the states get only 32. So if it's total tax, center gets to keep 60. If it's 80, 20 tax surcharge, center gets to keep 68. So there's a big incentive for the center to impose surcharge and cess, not directly tax. And that incentive has been growing. In fact, Reserve Bank people have pointed out to me that the taxable share has been coming down, which is that out of the total taxes of the state and of the center, out of the total revenue, tax revenue, cesses and surcharges are becoming a bigger proportion. And what they share with the states is declining. So there is, I believe, a case for the center to reconsider. Their argument is that we are levying this cesses and surcharge because we've taken on additional responsibilities like funding local bodies, etc. True, that is true. But I believe that there is need for greater transparency, there's need for some formula, and there's some need for some ceiling, which everybody understands and appreciates. Some more transparencies to impose some responsible behavior on the part of the center. Centrally sponsored schemes, again, I believe that some of the grievances of the states are valid. For example, one centrally sponsored scheme is training bamboo weavers. Now, how many states in the country have training for bamboo weavers? Many states may not even have that. And they can't use that money. And these schemes are not revised. States are not consulted. So there is need for the center to be more consultative, more conciliatory, consult with the states on the design of the schemes, review them every 5 years, and give states a choice in a basket of schemes rather than just say that these are the schemes. Say have a basket of 50 schemes and each state choose 5 or 6 or whatever to the extent of your entitlement. That might be a better thing to do. The third thing I believe the central government must do is to enforce a code of conduct on freebies. Freebies is not probably a pejorative term, but I've used it because that's how we most understand it. There's no other need for a code of conduct. There's been competitive populism. We saw that in Maharashtra election. We're seeing that ahead of the Delhi election today. Many people say that we started that freebie thing in the Telugu states, in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. I don't know to what extent we are to blame for that, but this is caught on, this competitive populism all over the country. I admit that in a poor country where millions struggle for daily livelihood, it is incumbent, even mandatory, for the governments to give some transfer payments to the most vulnerable. But there's got to be a restraint on that. Well, because these freebies are at the margin being financed by borrowing. You cannot borrow and give away money for consumption. It is like a household borrowing for performing a marriage or for going on a vacation or for partying. In principle, a loan must pay for itself. So if you keep on borrowing and use it for current consumption, your loan burden goes up. So there's got to be a restraint on that. The second concern I have about freebies is that each freebie is not evaluated against the big picture. If some chief minister decides that I am going to give free bus rides to women, have we done a study that giving free bus rides to women is the best way to support women? Where is the evidence? Probably it is the best because politicians have a ground sense. But we need some evidence that this is the best use for that money. And most of all, as Chairman Mao said, if you give a man a fish a day, you support him for a day. If you teach him to fish, you support him for a lifetime. So there's a strong case for restraining spending on freebies. The biggest disappointment on freebies is that 3 years ago, the Prime Minister made a statement that there must be restraint on freebies. 2 months after that, they had UP elections, the BJP went on a spree of giving freebies. And today, they're competing head to toe with toe-to-toe with AAP on giving freebies. So no party is sanguine, no party is sacred in this, everybody is competing. I think there is a case, no political party would voluntarily accept a code of conduct. No state government would do it. There's need for the center, just as they've done FRBM, just as they've done GST, the need for the center to start a dialogue on this and evolve a code of conduct on freebies. So at this time, I want to summarize what I've said so far. I talked about 3 phases in the evolution of India's federalism: the constitutional division of responsibilities, the 60-40 picture, how the center of gravity is shifting towards the states, the states' contention that the terms of fiscal federalism are loaded against them. I argued against that, but I also said, just to establish my credentials, that the center must be more conciliatory and more consultative. Now, before I conclude, I want to spend 30 seconds imagining the India of your dreams, just 30 seconds. So we all know it's a common dream that we all have, a shared dream that we want to be a happy and prosperous country, a model global citizen, harmonious society without conflicts, an innovative culture, like maybe we should do DeepSeek. Okay? So we want that. In fact, we didn't dream because Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore had dreamed for all of us many years ago. In that, where the mind is free, many of you might know that, right? Now, if I were to say, having dreamt of your dream of India, of your dreams, what are the 5 things we must do to achieve that dream? Again, we will say accelerate the growth rate, ensure that the benefits of growth are widely shared, improve education and health outcomes, combat climate change, generate jobs, improve skills. Got a list. I guarantee that not one of your lists would have had center-state cooperation as one of the things required for becoming a developed country by 2047. So there's one message that you're going to take away from this talk today. I want to urge that center-state cooperation is vital for us to get to Viksit Bharat by 2047. We want to be Viksit Bharat by 2047. The agenda for getting there is broad, familiar, so I don't have to spend time on that. But I want to emphasize that we cannot get to Viksit Bharat, we cannot be a developed country by 2047 unless the center and states cooperate. The first generation reforms that we did in 1991, Dr. Reddy was part of that core team. The first generation reforms that we did in 1991 could be done by the central government without consulting the states, because they all fell in the domain of the center, dismantling the license permit regime, liberalizing imports, opening up the financial sector. They did not have to consult the states. The second generation reforms that we have to do today, factor markets, land, labor, taxation, as we saw over the last 15 years, they cannot be done without the consent of state. We saw that, for example, on farmers' bill. We saw that on the land bill. We saw that on investment in single brand retail, foreign investment in single brand retail. So the second generation reforms, which are one of the requirements for us to get to a developed country by 2047, cannot be done by the central government unless states cooperate. So I believe center-state cooperation is more vital than before. I'll stop here. Thank you very much. I want to thank CESS for the opportunity given to me. And once again, my homage to Sri B.P.R. Vithal, from whom I've learned so much. Thank you.
It was extremely thought-provoking, as usual, by Dr. Subbarao Garu to talk about India's fiscal federalism and Vadis. So before we throw open the floor for a short Q&A session, sir, I just wanted to, just add a few points. One, of course, we are all Kupasta Mandukal in the sense that I have only worked in the state, but your experience is wide and far-reaching, national, international, and finally you're also teaching now at Yale. So I remember the quote that you said of Isaiah Berlin about hedgehogs and foxes. So therefore, I looked at it purely from a state's perspective, that too, just being recently submitting a memorandum to the 16th Finance Commission. But a couple of points, sir, from the state's perspective. What has happened in Telangana, I can share. In 2014 and 15, the amount of resources that we received from the center, all kinds of resources put together, whether it is devolution or grants, Finance Commission grants, SDRF, NDRF, all put together, was 25% of our total resources, sir. And last year, 23-24, it has come down to 15%. So what has happened is that as the state became richer and richer, we started getting less and less kind of a money. So that's what is the concern, which was expressed broadly by the southern Indian states in general, sir. That is one point, sir. And secondly, you also have rightly observed that Government of India has not really put conditions under Article 293(3), except that they started in 2020. For the first time, this was invoked, and that has been the bone of contention. Kerala has approached, Supreme Court. But of course, Supreme Court also has not decided anything. The matter is still being decided. It's being heard. But essentially, because of this creative accounting, which many of the states have started, resorting to overcome the limitations of the FRBM. So that's why I think the center has to come down heavily and then put these kind of a conditions. But otherwise, extraordinarily lucid, thought-provoking lecture. And then how historically the fiscal federalism has really evolved and tilted towards the states. I think that's what is very, very clear from Sir's exposition of how it has extraordinarily happened. And finally, before, we take up Q&A, one small data point, which some of you might be aware, is that we think China has a very centralized kind of an economy, but the amount of money which is spent at below state level, that is provinces, below province level, of the total expenditure of the country is 53%, compared to 3% in India. What we spend at the district and mandal and gram panchayat levels, of the overall expenditure of the government, we spend about 3%. And for China, it's about 53%. It only shows the ways to go, that as a country that we really have to go.
Now, I request Professor M.P. to kindly propose a vote on this.
We have come to the end of the program. At the outset, I thank Dr. D. Subbarao Garu for delivering this third annual memorial lecture of BPR in memory of Dr. B.P.R. Vithal Garu. He has explained very well the transformation in federalism in India in 3 phases, and also elaborated upon the contributions of Vithal Garu and Y.V. Reddy in saying that states have got a larger share of the central sector shares, central sector taxes, and also larger autonomy. So, and also we had a very enlivening discussion through the question and answers. Generally, a memorial lecture doesn't have question and answers, but sir has agreed to take some questions, and it went on for quite a long time. Subbarao Garu also has taken all efforts to see that the lecture is organized well, because he was closely coordinating with us and with attention to detail, so that we pay homage to Sri Vithal Garu in a very befitting manner. On behalf of the chairman, Board of Governors, I thank him profusely for making this event happen very successfully. The lecture has emphasized the need for a deeper and mature cooperation between centre and states to march towards Vikasit Bharat by the centenary of India's independence. I thank Sri K. Ramakrishna Rao Garu, Special Chief Secretary, Finance and Planning, for readily agreeing to chair this session and also chairing the discussion very aptly. The chair's remarks have added value to the lecture. He raised some issues which led to the discussion by the speaker. Dr. G.R. Reddy, founder member CESS and member of Board of Governors, has extended cooperation in organizing the event. He is closely associated with Dr. Subbarao Garu, and that made our task easier in organizing this event. We know that Dr. Subbarao Garu is a taskmaster, perfectionist, and as I said, he works to the minutest details, which is to be emulated by all of us. Professor D.M. Nachne, chairman of CESS, could not make his presence here. I thank him for the advice and support extended in organizing this event and in all other events also. I thank Professor C.H. Hanumantarao, who was online, Professor Fatima Ali Khan, board member, member of the Board of Governors, for taking time to attend this lecture. Dr. Y.V. Reddy, a close associate of Sri Vithal Garu, who has been here, who calls him his guru and never misses an opportunity to be at CESS, coming to Vithal sir's occasions. I thank the past IAS officers who are all here. We took a special interest to extend invitation to the IAS officers and current IAS officers and past IAS officers. I thank all who have attended to today's event. Dr. C. Ramanohar Reddy, founder of India Forum, has extended invitation to Manthan list of guests, and I thank the support that he has extended to us in extending the invitations, and I've seen that many of them also have attended. I thank all the heads of the academic institutions, universities, and scholars from different institutions who have attended this lecture. Thank Dr. Sanjay Baru and family members of Sri Vithal Garu for attending this lecture and participating in this. The press, both English and Telugu, have attended, and we will look forward for their coverage tomorrow. From CESS, the administration and faculty have extended their cooperation, and thanks to them. And the copies of the memorial lecture are kept outside. All the guests and invitees can take a copy from outside. And I invite you all for lunch. Thank you all.